Alright guys, welcome back. So the program that I'm using only lets me record up to 15 minutes, so that's why we have broken this into two parts here. So where we left off here, the Western Allies, Japan and Hitler are going to declare war on the United States. When Japan bombs Pearl Harbor, that is when the United States enters the war, and because Japan and Germany are aligned, when we declare war on Japan, we're also going to declare war on Germany, and they in turn declare war on the United States. So now the United States is going to enter the war. They're going to arrive in Britain to help the British out, and the Western Allies are now going to figure out a plan to invade the mainland of Europe and liberate it here from the Nazis, who have pretty much taken over all of Europe at this point. Okay? So they're going to start off in Italy, and the British and the United States take Sicily in the southern part of Italy. That's the island that the boot of Italy is kicking there, right? So they invade Sicily, take over Sicily, and then move up the boot towards Rome there. And they finally do take Rome. And when they take Rome, they oust Mussolini, and they actually give Mussolini back to the Italian people, who end up killing him in the streets because they just hate him so much. So we didn't actually kill Mussolini. The Italian people kill Mussolini, but, he was a pretty bad guy. Just a little refresher here. Our Axis powers, there's only three Axis powers. We have Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy under Mussolini, and Imperial Japan under the leadership of General Hideki Tojo. Okay, and then pretty much everyone else is part of the Allied forces. But our four big Allied forces are Great Britain, the USSR, Soviet Union. And remember, they're going to join in once Hitler decides to invade the Soviet Union. The United States, who joins after the bombings of Pearl Harbor, which we're going to get to next week and talk about that next week. And then Free France. And this is the part of France that is under direct control of Germany, and we're really talking about the French resistance here. We're not talking about Vichy France, that puppet state. All right, so first thing that the British and the US are going to do is they're going to try and bomb German cities, and they are able to bomb German cities pretty successfully here, and Germany's going to take a lot of damage from these Allied bombing raids. Okay, however, this does not make Germany surrender. So the United States and Britain know that they have to actually invade Germany in order to get Hitler to surrender. So they start formulating a plan of how to make this happen. Okay. And this is where we're going to get D-Day. And D-Day is the planned invasion of mainland Europe by Allied forces. And the Allied forces is going to be led by this guy, General Eisenhower. He's going to go on to be the president of the United States in the 1950s, but he is the main Allied commander over in Europe. And so he's the guy that's going to coordinate all of this D-Day operation here, which is the invasion of mainland Europe. Okay, and we have forces from the United States, Canada, and Britain. Don't forget Canada, the mighty Canadians. And the whole idea is that they're going to liberate France and then move on to Germany. So this is actually kind of a cool operation here. And when you think about it, when you're looking at this map here, you would think that the Allied troops would try to make their invasion here because it's the shortest point here. They don't have to cross as much of the English Channel. But that's exactly what they want the Germans to think. The Germans, this little area here is called Calais, and all the Germans, the Nazi Germany, have a bunch of forces right up here and are really watching this area very, very closely because they believe that that is where the attack is going to be launched. However, instead, the Allied forces are going to plan their invasion over here in Normandy, on the beaches of Normandy. But it's a very interesting plan. So what's going to happen is that the Allied forces really want the Germans to continue to think that the invasion is going to happen over here so that they're not worrying about this area over here. And they do this in kind of a very cool strategy. We actually have a ghost invasion or a fake invasion being planned over here on this side of England, close to Calais. Now this guy down here, oh, this guy down here, this is Eisenhower here, but this guy up here, this is General Patton. And General Patton, up until this point of the war and in World War I, he was probably the most decorated and highest ranking general in the United States Army. Very, very good military strategist, but probably not the friendliest of people that you would have met. And recently, up until kind of leading up into the D-Day invasions, he has gotten himself into a little bit of trouble. Some bad publicity, you could say. There was an incident where he was visiting a hospital where there's a bunch of wounded soldiers, and he was, kind of going through talking to each of these soldiers, one of those publicity things. And of course, he's being followed by newspaper people as he's doing this. And he gets to this one bed of a soldier that at the time was called shell shock. But today we call it PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder. And that's why he was in the hospital. And he comes to this one soldier and basically yells at his soldier, saying that he's faking everything and needs to be back doing his duty to his country. Obviously, this does not look good. The newspaper people write it in the newspapers, it's published, and he gets a lot of criticism for this, and rightly so. So he's kind of not exactly in everybody's good graces right now. However, the Germans still think that Patton is in charge, not Eisenhower. So the Allied troops, the Allied forces actually place General Patton over here and make sure he is seen driving along the coast here, so that the German spies over here see him and confirm that he is there in this location. They even go one step further. They literally make a fake army out of balloons. If you guys can see here, this is a blow-up tank. Literally like a bounce house, but a tank. And they're going to put a whole bunch of these fake tanks, fake airplanes, fake ammunition, all along the coast there across from Calais to, again, make the Germans think that the invasion is going to happen there. And they actually hire actors to do this. Okay, so there's a division of the New York Infantry that are actually a whole bunch of actors, and they're the ones that come in and they do like radio messages back and forth, making sure that the Germans intercept those radio messages, confirming that this is where the invasion is going to happen. Like they're doing like maneuvers, kind of acting things out over here in Calais to get the Germans to think that this is where it's going to happen. It's a huge operation, and it's kind of cool. So the D-Day invasions are successful, very, very bloody. However, they are successful, and the Allied forces are able to invade France. And once they invade France, they start moving towards Germany. And if we remember, we also have the Soviet Union moving from the Soviet Union, from Russia, towards Germany as well. So we have the USSR coming from the east, and we have the Allied forces of Britain, the United States, Canada, and now France, liberated France, coming from the west, and they're eventually going to meet up inside Germany here. They meet up in Berlin, and before they could get to Hitler, Hitler's going to kill himself and his wife in his kind of underground bunker here in Berlin. So unlike what we're going to see in Japan, where the leaders of Japan are going to go on trial, Hitler himself does not go on trial because he kills himself before the Allied forces are able to capture him. However, the remaining German army does surrender, and this is officially going to be the end of the war in Europe. Okay? Now, this is the European theater, though. Next week, we're going to be talking about the Pacific theater, the war against Japan, and that's going to last a little bit longer, and we'll talk about why. But this is the end of the war in Europe once the German army surrenders here in Berlin. So some graphs here. Which country lost the most people? It's actually the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union loses a ton of people over there on the Eastern Front fighting and kind of chasing the German army back towards Germany here. More than a quarter of the deaths, all of the deaths in World War II, are going to be happening in the Soviet Union. Okay. Also, this is China. China takes a huge chunk here, and a lot of the fighting that happens, especially against Japan, and initially is going to happen in China. And so we got to remember that they have a ton of casualties as well. Okay. However, this is going to be a very, very deadly war for a lot of different reasons. And when we compare World War I and World War II, this is another pretty shocking statistic. Civilian deaths, meaning non-combatants, people who are not soldiers, account for 54% of the deaths during World War II. That's over half. Obviously, a lot of these civilian deaths are going to come out of the Holocaust and Nazi Germany's goal of purifying their race. But we also do have a ton of those bombings and bombing raids of the cities going on, and a whole lot of other atrocities that are going to happen during this war against civilians. Okay, and we're going to get into a little bit more detail about that later. All right, so that is the end of the war in Europe.